In the name of God, Father, Son and Holy Spirit. Amen. Yesterday and Wednesday this week mark significant anniversaries for us as part of the Diocese of Newcastle. Yesterday, the 25th of June, marked the 175th anniversary of the letters patent which established both the Diocese of Newcastle and made the township of Newcastle a city, because you could not have a cathedral, which is the centre of a diocese, the symbolic centre of the diocese, in a place which was not a city at that time. So from 1847, the Diocese of Newcastle and the City of Newcastle have shared a special link, a special bond. Of course, the cathedral that was designated to be the cathedral in 1847 was not this magnificent building, but a far humbler building built here on this site from 1817. On Wednesday this week, the 29th of June, the feast of St. Peter and St. Paul, William Tyrrell, along with 3 others, were consecrated bishop in Westminster Abbey for their service to go to these new missionary dioceses of Cape Town, Adelaide, Melbourne and Newcastle. You know that I have a great passion, a great respect for William Tyrrell, or if you didn't note that, you're about to discover. He's one of my holy people, and he's a complex person, not without faults, though, I tend to turn a bit of a blind eye to those at times. What he was, what I admire in him, was his passion, his absolute passion and commitment to the gospel, and his desire to follow God's call on his life, wherever that took him, even to the other side of the world. In 2019, you may remember that I had some long service leave. And one of the things that was important to me on that trip was to make some pilgrimages to places that had a special connection with William Tyrrell. So I've stood in the chapel where he was consecrated bishop. I've seen his name on the board outside that chapel of all the bishops who began their episcopal journey in that place. And one of the places I dearly wanted to visit was Bowyer Abbey, which is the parish where Tyrrell was the vicar when he was called to be the Bishop of Newcastle. I know some of you have visited Bowyer Abbey, certainly members of our choir have on their tours. And for me, visiting this place and being able to stand in the places where William Tyrrell had stood before he left to come to here, this place which Augustus Short, Bishop of Adelaide, described as a wild bush affair, I had hoped to gain some insight into what it was that fired his passion. Bowyer Abbey, the Abbey Church, is in fact the dining hall of what was a large monastic building and place in Bowyer. So much so that the pulpit is not in a central position, but is actually in the middle of the side wall, because the tradition was that as the monks ate, someone would read to them. And when you go to St James Morpeth, which is modelled on the church at Bowyer, you'll find that the pulpit, whilst not on the side wall, is certainly pierced in the centre of a wall high up at the front of the church. I got the feeling that in Bowyer, which has over 1,000 years of tradition of Christian worship on that site, that there's an interest in these pilgrims who come from the Newcastle on the other side of the world. They want the parishioners in that place to understand why it's so special for us to go to Bowyer. Because for them, William Tyrrell is a relatively recent vicar. When you look at their vicar's board, it stretches back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. The people who greeted me were wonderfully welcoming and wanted to make this as special a visit as it could be for me, reaching this place of holy pilgrimage. And it was enough for me to stand at the font where I knew that Tyrrell had baptised, to stand in the sanctuary where I knew that Tyrrell had taken bread and wine and shared it as we do. And they said to me, "Would you like to see something that belonged to Tyrrell?" Would I ever? "We have," they said, "his breakfast cup." I'd never seen a breakfast cup. In our house, all cups are equal. A breakfast cup is the first one you grab when you stumble out of bed, bleary-eyed, and make a cup of tea. And they reverently produced this beautiful china, hand-painted teacup and sat it on the table before me. I wasn't allowed to touch it. I think they thought I might have put it in my handbag. I was amazed. A breakfast cup. That we would have breakfast cups. This was a world that clearly I wasn't part of. But as I have thought more about that cup, I've realised that it symbolises something very important about what Bishop Tyrrell said yes to when he said yes to God's call to follow him to the other side of the world. I've seen the advertisement that was printed in the paper where Tyrrell sold off all his goods because he could not bring those goods, that fine cellar of wine that he had, all those dinner services, he could not bring them on the Medway, the ship that brought him over. There was no room for a breakfast cup in this new life. There was no room for all that that cup symbolised in terms of a fine house filled with servants, leisurely breakfasts in an English village. There was no room for that breakfast cup in the sea chest which held his possessions as he travelled out on the Medway, that sea chest which doubled as an altar. That breakfast cup remains in Bowyer, where it belongs. Because here, in this place, Tyrrell was fired with a zeal and a passion for the care of the people over what was initially a vast diocese, and a deep, deep passion that the people of these lands should know that God was and always has been here, and for the white settlers, that the God whom they worshipped on the other side of the world was still the same God here, and that love of God was just as powerful as it ever was and always will be. There's no room for a breakfast cup if you're riding on horseback around the diocese. There's no room for a breakfast cup if you're travelling to places where there aren't even roads. Leaving the breakfast cup behind, for me, has become a symbol of all that Tyrrell left when he said yes to coming here. And we are the beneficiaries of all that he gave us because he left all behind. Jesus says in the Gospel, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have their nest, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." And then he goes on to call people to follow. And they give all sorts of reasons why they can't, which sound perfectly reasonable to us. But what they are allegories about the things which they cannot leave behind. They cannot imagine a future without. That breakfast cup is a symbol for me of all that Tyrrell left behind. He could have stayed quite comfortably the vicar of Bewley. It's a beautiful abbey church. It's a beautiful part of the world. Instead, he comes and lives and works and prays here because God has called him, and that is central to his life and faith. We've probably all got our breakfast cups, and I don't mean a literal bone china cup. We've probably all got those things which represent something to us, that ties us or that holds us. And God says to us, in the life to which I'm calling you, in sharing my love with others, is there room for that breakfast cup on your journey? Amen.